Hello, my name is Glenn McGrew, and I'm a VolCel. In case you don't know what that means, and you probably don't, it means voluntary celibate. And I know there are other people out there, and each of us has got our own reason for being celibate and chaste. Well, this is my story. In 2014, after 7 years of denying herself treatment because she felt she'd done something wrong and had to punish herself, my wife was finally forced to go to a doctor by 3 weeks. That's 3 weeks of non-stop vaginal bleeding. She came home that day from the doctor's, and she said that the doctor was not sure. And this was an expert, mind you, but it was in Indonesia, so maybe we can cut her a little slack. And the woman had been kind of rude, but she had said to Ita, my wife, that there was a chance that it was cancer. And I said, well, it's probably nothing, but whatever it is, we'll deal with it together. How naive. A few weeks later, she had a second meeting with the doctor, and the biopsy had revealed that it was cervical cancer stage 2B. Although that doctor didn't actually tell us the stage, the doctor said she didn't know. We had to find that out from a completely different doctor because she refused to go back to that doctor because that doctor had been kind of mean to her. So my wife started radiation, chemo. That was not fun. 70% of cervical cancer is caused by something called HPV, or human papillomavirus. It's what causes warts. And when I say warts, I mean any kind of warts. Not everybody who gets it has warts, though. So I could have one on my finger and not even know about it. But that's beside the point. The point is my wife had warts on her cervix that had mutated her DNA, and that had caused cancer. And through a series of mistakes by the doctors and mistakes by us, my wife in 2017 died. She was stage 4 by that point, but it wasn't the cancer that killed her. But that's beside the point too. When my wife died of cervical cancer, I made a choice. I had talked to experts in Indonesia, and when I came back to the United States after her death, I talked to some people here too. And the consensus I got was that there was no way they would be able to find out where I had HPV or if I had it unless I had active symptoms. I said, well, can't you just test wherever? And they said no, because number one, they have to scrape fairly vigorously. And even if they do that, if they don't have the right area and they don't scrape vigorously enough, they may not get the cells that are contaminated with HPV. So I may get a false negative. So even if I didn't have HPV before I met with my wife, if somehow she got it first and she was a virgin, then chances are very good that I have HPV. And clearly the HPV that I have is one of the small number of strains that is high risk for cancer. There are other strains that are low risk, and there are other strains still that are almost no risk at all. But I'm not that fortunate to have just the one that causes unpleasant looking warts on your genitals and other areas. Because the truth is most likely it came from me. Why do I say this? Well, the fact of the matter is before I met my wife, I never cheated on her, okay? Let's get that straight. I was never unfaithful to my wife. And we weren't a jealous couple. But prior to meeting my wife, I had several partners, sexually speaking. And I know of at least one of them definitely had HPV, because one day she came to me and she said that she had cervical dysplasia. Now, if you don't know what that means, it's when you have got precancerous cells found from a pap smear, like warts, on your cervix. And they can use cryotherapy, which is freezing, liquid nitrogen, to freeze the warts off. That doesn't necessarily get rid of the virus, but it does get rid of the warts, which can prevent the cancer, theoretically, from developing. Well, the initial discovery of the connection between cancer and HPV was only discovered in the mid-'80s. It was only confirmed, I think, in the 90s, which is when they started coming out with the first vaccination, which I believe was Gardasil. And there are a variety of vaccinations you can get, but they're not expected to last forever, and it's recommended that you get it before you're sexually active. So they recommend children 9 to 12, especially girls, because they're at much higher risk of getting cancer for some reason than guys. And since vaccinations for HPV didn't start for quite some time, and certainly not consistently, and I don't even know when that would have started consistently, but it may be in the after 2000 at some point. The chances of me meeting another woman my age who has been vaccinated successfully against HPV is like, and I'm 51, okay? I know I look a little bit younger than that, but I'm 51. So the chances are almost zero. And I don't know which part of my body has HPV. I know when I was a kid, I remember getting warts on my fingers and on my feet, different kinds. But yeah, I don't know. So I basically have got choices, yeah? I could be a selfish prick and just go out there and put myself back out there and get another woman and risk giving her HPV. Now, granted, a huge percentage, I mean like over 50% of the world's population is already infected with HPV. And it's not something that your body normally sloughs off or defeats. But that's not an excuse. And it's also not an excuse that only a small number of the over 150 strains of HPV cause cancer. So yeah, I could take a risk, knowing what I know, that my wife died of cervical cancer that was caused by HPV, and that I'm probably infected, and try again with another woman. And she might die. And I'll tell you what, if you've never watched somebody go through radiotherapy and chemotherapy and not wanting to eat and not wanting to drink and becoming traumatized and slowly losing vitality until they become a shell of themselves physically and mentally, to the point where your loved one is skin and bones, no hair, and it looks like they've been sucked dry and they no longer think correctly. They make errors, they say things that aren't even true. Well, if you haven't experienced that, you don't know why that isn't an option for me. But trust me, you don't want to go through that. So that's option number one, and that's not an option for me. Option number two would be for me to find a younger woman. And to be honest, when I returned to America, I had 3 different young, very attractive women hit on me. But I told them the truth. And they weren't interested in taking the risk. More power to them. I would make the same choice. Why start a relationship with a guy you don't really know because you're physically attracted to him and take on the risk of dying of cancer? It just doesn't make sense. And yet, there are people that would do that. I was contacted last month by a woman from Indonesia, where my wife was from. And that woman, I told her she still wanted to be my wife. I wasn't interested. But yeah, I could go for a younger woman who has been inoculated against, I'm sorry if I'm not using the right word, vaccinated against HPV. Currently in America we use Gardasil 9, which I believe means there are 9 different strains of HPV that it protects against. And I believe it also protects against non-cancerous versions of HPV so that you reduce your risk of getting regular warts on your genitals, which, yay! Who wants warts on their genitals? And I've had my kids vaccinated. In other parts of the world, I believe some parts use the old Gardasil, some parts use the new Gardasil 9, some parts like Europe use Cervarix, which also protects against several strains of HPV. So I could go look for a woman like that. I could put a personal ad and say, woman with HPV vaccination wanted. I'm sure that'll go over really well. But even if I were willing to do that, if I were willing to get into the game and just honestly tell women I'm HPV positive and I can't date you unless you have been vaccinated and there's still a risk. So I think that my odds of success, except for a woman who, like that woman in Indonesia, who for whatever reason wants to take the risk, I'm just not excited about that possibility. I mean, ignoring the low chance of success, I'm just not excited about taking the risk that I have a strain that Gardasil 9 or Cervarix or whatever doesn't protect against. So there's the third choice, the choice I took, to be voluntarily chaste and celibate, to not get into relationships of a romantic or sexual nature. Does it suck? You know, if you had asked me that years ago when I was still young and brainwashed by the constant bombardment of advertising and movies and TV shows and books that usually promote romance and marriage and love, when I had that yearning to fulfill myself by having a mate, yeah, I would have said, you're crazy, man. Maybe even knowing what I know. I don't know. But I know what I know, and I know what happened to my wife. And I'm just not willing to take the risk. So, does it bother me? No. It doesn't bother me at all. Do I miss my wife? Yes. Do my kids miss my wife? Yes, absolutely. Do I want to lose a second woman? Do I want another woman to go through what my wife went through? Absolutely no. Never. So it's really easy for me to make the choice to abstain from romance and sex. Maybe you can understand and maybe you can't, but I hope you'll at least think about it. And I hope that you've learned something and you'll make wise choices. And make choices that make you happy and better. Okay? Thanks for listening.